Hello, I'm Victor, and this is online literature class. Thank you for not scrolling past, and I hope you get to enjoy today's class. Please give me a follow, comment on this video, like or share the video as it helps in improving my visibility. Thank you as I anticipate your support. Now, let's get started. In our last class, we wrapped up the classes we've been having on features of drama, and consequently, we also wrapped up the entire series of classes we've been having on drama as a genre of literature. And we did that by looking at two production-based features of drama, which are costume designer and makeup artist. We looked at costume designer and makeup artist as production-based features of drama, where we learned that costume designer is a professional name given to a person who is responsible for designing and selecting the appropriate costumes to be used by each and every actor of a dramatic work. And we also learned that makeup artist is a professional name given to a person who is responsible for the dressing and the making up of each and every actor of a dramatic work. That's all for the last class. In today's class, we will begin a fresh topic. Remember, I said we will begin to look at either poetry or prose as genre of literature in our last class. So the decision has been made. We will begin to look at poetry as a genre of literature. And today in particular, we're going to look at the definition of poetry. We're going to look at the definition of poetry. Now, let's get started. Poetry generally can be defined as one among the major genres of literature, and it is an imaginative and creative literary writing that is written in verses and stanzas. By verses and stanzas, we mean a single line of a poem is a verse, and then group of lines in a poem are stanzas. Groups of lines in a poem are stanzas. So poetry can be defined as an imaginative and creative literary writing that is written in verses and stanzas. It is a genre of literature that is characterized by features like meter, rhythm, rhyme, ellipsis, inversion, and other elements of poetry. Now, there are other definitions of poetry, the definitions of poetry by several scholars of literature according to how they perceive poetry is or what they think poetry should be. Now, we will look at few among them. The first one we're going to look at is William Wordsworth, the man on the screen. He defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion captured in tranquility. To him, poetry is actually emotion, and an emotion that is spontaneous. That is to say, an emotion that is natural. It is flowing naturally without any manipulation, without any force propelling it. It is just a natural overflow of an emotion. And this emotion is just not captured anytime or anyhow. It is captured in tranquility. That is to say, when the poet is enjoying his alone time, or when the poet finds himself alone. That is the perspective of poetry that William Wordsworth has. On the other hand, there is another popular literary scholar by name Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He responded to a remark by saying, poetry is ideas clothed with words and not words clothed with ideas. To him, poetry is like a cloth. It is ideas that are clothed with words. That is to say, you use words to express poetry, not forcing ideas on words, not expressing words with ideas. That is to say, what should be enjoyed first is the words, and then it is under these words that the ideas of this poetry gets revealed. That's the perspective of poetry that Coleridge has. Another popular literary scholar by name Robert Frost defined poetry as what gets lost with translation. To him, poetry is what gets lost with translation. When you read a poem and you try to translate it or you try to interpret it, there is high tendency that the original meaning of that poem will be lost. Any poet that writes a poem writes that poem with an idea, with a certain meaning, a definite meaning. However, when other people pick this poem and begin to read it, they begin to deduce other meanings. And the more the translation, the more the interpretation of this poem, the higher the tendency of the original meaning getting lost. Another perspective of his is that poetry starts with enjoyment and ends in wisdom. Poetry starts with enjoyment and ends with wisdom. Initially, poetry is meant to be enjoyed, but then it shouldn't stop at enjoyment. As the time goes by, with the constant study of poetry, several lessons will be learnt, and as such, the perspective of Frost about poetry, where he said poetry starts with enjoyment and ends in wisdom. That's all for the perspective of scholars about poetry, and consequently, it is the end of our class on poetry today. In summary, we have learned that poetry is one among the major genres of literature. It is a creative and imaginative literary writing that is written in verses and stanzas and characterized by features like rhyme, meter, rhythm, etc. And we have also looked at some various perspectives of poetry by popular literary scholars. Thank you for staying through the class. If you have a question, leave it in the comment section. And if you have a comment, leave that too in the comment section. I look forward to having you in our next class. I'm Victor. Bye.